Good evening and welcome to another edition of the Daily Fix. I am your usual host and presenter, Advocate Tulo Hoyani. This evening, I want to share with you some of the developments in the Senzo MEYIWA trial, and especially around the cross-examination of Advocate George Baloyi of accused number 1, Muzi Sibia. That cross-examination is focused, or the segment of this video will be focusing on the cross-examination of Muzi Sibia with regard to the alleged confession that Muzi Sibia made. You'll recall that Muzi Sibia has vehemently denied that he ever made any confession statement. This dates back to the days of the trial within a trial early last year, and the court then made a decision following the leading of that evidence, that confession evidence, that it was admissible. Now, interestingly, in this confession statement, which Muzi Sibia made, if we can make anything out of it, there are two names that come out of that so-called confession, which I must reiterate, Muzi Sibia has always denied he ever made. And these two names that come up there are the names Marco and Makimba. According to that confession statement, which Advocate George Baloyi is reading to Muzi Sibia, it was Marco who told Muzi Sibia what the job was all about, that the job had been commissioned by Kelly Kumalo and that the job was to kill Senzo MEYIWA. Now, look at that confession and say to yourself, even if this confession can be believed, let us for one moment believe that this confession was made. Then out of that confession, there clearly comes out a disclosure by Muzi Sibia then, to the effect that Kelly Kumalo commissioned the killing of Senzo MEYIWA. If we can go along with that Baloyi confession, because Muzi Sibia says he knows nothing about the contents of that confession statement that Baloyi is reading to him, and that all that is contained there can be asked. He can ask Mbutu about and Gininda about what appears there, totally distancing himself from that confession statement. Now, the question that arises is, you'll recall that throughout the trial, or at some stage, Gininda said that Kelly Kumar was never arrested because this was a prosecution-driven investigation. In other words, the decision to whether or not to arrest Kelly Kumalo, according to Gininda, was then left in terms of that prosecution-driven investigation, was then left to the prosecutors. So that we have to ask the prosecutors then the buck stops with the prosecutors, so to speak. Now here is Gininda coming up clearly with a confession statement, a disputed confession statement, allegedly made by Muzi Sibia, wherein Kelly Kumalo is identified as the mastermind, as the person who commissioned the killing of Senzo MEYIWA. So that if what Gininda told us that this was a prosecution-driven investigation, we now have it on record coming from Baloyi himself that they were aware as the prosecution from this very early stages in the investigation that Kelly Kumalo was the mastermind behind the killing of Senzo MEYIWA and had in fact commissioned it. So the question remains, why was Kelly Kumalo not arrested? Because Gininda shifts the blame to the prosecution. He says it was a prosecution-led investigation. Now, in terms of the prosecution's own disputed evidence, this confession evidence, right? They had identified through Muzi Sibia, if this confession statement can be believed, that Kelly Kumalo was the mastermind and the person who was behind the killing of Senzo MEYIWA. Why then did the prosecution, when it had that kind of information, this was a prosecution-driven investigation according to Gininda. This one confession then ought to have served as clear evidence that Kelly Kumalo was involved in the killing of Senzo MEYIWA, and Kelly Kumalo ought then to have been arrested, just like the other accused persons, have been implicated and arrested subsequent to the making of confessions. This is a very curious thing to come across. Just take a listen to this, and I will come back to this issue again. Take a listen to this.
Muzi Sibiya is now confronted with the contents of a confession statement that the state says he deposed in May 2020. But he continues to dig in his heels, distancing himself from the contents that he says are unknown to him. The statement indicates that two friends had made contact with him and told him about a job they had received.
Both they are from KwaNongoma in KwaZulu-Natal. I just entered the car and sit at the back seat. Marco said to me, there's a job we need to do. I asked them what job, and Marco said they were hired by Kelly to kill Senzo. And I asked the suspect which Kelly and which Senzo. The suspect said Kelly Kumalo and Senzo MEYIWA. They are the people we are talking about.
Akazi kuze kube nesikhathi engidibana kuso noMarco noMakimba behamba ngepholo ngene ngemuva ngikhulume nabo. Akazi ngize ngikhuluma indaba kaKelly, akazi ngize ngikhuluma indaba kaSenzo. Akukho engikwaziyo ngokufa kukaSenzo.
There was never a stage where I met Marco and Makimba and I entered the vehicle and sat at the back. There was never a time where I spoke to them about Kelly and Senzo or the killing of Senzo. I know nothing about the death of Senzo.
Akukho engikwaziyo ngoKelly.
I know nothing about Kelly.
This is not the first time that Muzi denies ever deposing the statement. He previously objected to it being admitted as evidence, alleging that he had been severely assaulted and tortured in the lead-up to him being told to sign what was an already compiled statement by Colonel Mboto at the Deep Kloof police station in Soweto. But the statement was admitted as evidence following a trial within a trial whose preliminary findings were that he had made it freely, voluntarily, and without undue influence. The statement also indicates that they had gone to a traditional healer to check if they would succeed in taking the life of the soccer star.
Marco told us that Kelly wants money from Senzo, but he never told Mkulu that. Mkulu, in parenthesis, traditional healer, checked for us and said we are going to succeed to kill the said person, and he also gave us protection in brackets, protection in parenthesis, medicine, and belts to put on our arms or at our waist, and which was going to make us to succeed in killing him and to protect us from any danger. We paid Mkulu 50 rand for checking our job.
I
know nothing about all of this. Gininda and Boto would know about this.
At the heart of the statement is that Sibiya allegedly implicates himself as not only a participant, but also a lookout man. And the state alleges that only he would have knowledge of the intimate details given in the statement.
I still maintain that I know nothing about all of this that is written here. Gininda and Boto would know about it.
Marco and Makimba got into the house, and Marco was the only one who was in possession of the firearm.
Marco no Makimba Ibona ke abantu abangena ngaphakathi endlini, uMarco uyena kuphela ke owayephethe isibhamu.
Angazi lutho ngayo yonke lento le ngoba ngisho ukuthi ngaba uGininda nombotha abantu abanolwazi lwalento.
I know nothing about all of this. As I say that it would be Gininda and Boto who would know about this.
The names on the statements are different from the names of Sibiya's co-accused who line up the dock with him. But the lead investigator, Brigadier Bongani Gininda, previously told the court that this was a deliberate move to mislead them. Sibiya's co-accused, Bongani Ndanzi, is also alleged to have deposed a confession statement where he implicates himself as one of the two intruders in the Khumalo home. The names of his co-accused appear there, and so does the name of singer Kelly Khumalo. Cross-examination continues on Monday. For Newsroom Africa on Channel 405, I'm Linda Mnisi.
In my opener there, I made mention of two names, Marco and Makimba. Allegedly, these are the people who come up in that confession statement. You see, Marco and Makimba, mark those names. These are the people, especially Marco. Marco is the one who does most of the talking because he's the one who explains to Muzi Sibiya what the job entails and gives him all the specifics of it. Now, you ask yourself, who is Marco and who is Makimba then in this trial? There's nobody called Marco or Makimba in this trial, especially amongst the accused persons. Now, Gininda explained that to say, no, those names were given by Muzi Sibiya to mislead the police. But as a matter of fact and on record now in court, here comes up this confession in terms of which Muzi Sibiya says he was in the company of one Marco and one Makimba. He does not mention any of his co-accused. And we just have to go, are we just supposed to go on with the explanation of Gininda that, Muzi Sibiya mentioned these names simply to mislead the investigators? We have to take this confession statement, if we can believe in it, that even if Muzi Sibiya says he was given a piece of paper after being severely tortured, which he ended up signing. He was just told to sign that piece of paper subsequent to that severe torture, and he signed it. Now, even if Muzi Sibiya did sign that document, or this document styled a confession, it talks about people other than the accused persons. It talks about Marco and Makimba. How can we, just on the say-so of Gininda, say that these names are being used to confuse investigators? Having said that, let me thank you for watching this video. Let me thank you for all the views and subscriptions that I'm seeing. And have a wonderful, wonderful Sunday evening. Thank you.